Can you be my mom just for school today? The question was only 7 words, but it carried the weight of a child who had spent years waiting for someone to notice him. Alexander Park stood outside the gates of Westbridge International School, a place where luxury cars arrived every morning and children ran toward their parents with bright smiles. But on that day, the 12-year-old heir of the powerful Park family stood alone. His expensive navy uniform was perfectly pressed, his polished shoes reflected the morning light, and yet his small hands held tightly onto the strap of his backpack as if it was the only thing keeping him steady. Everyone knew the Park name. They knew the family owned businesses across continents, lived in a mansion overlooking the city, and had influence that reached far beyond ordinary life. But no one knew how quiet Alexander's mornings had become since losing the warmth of a family moment he could no longer remember clearly. A few feet away, Amelia Carter was finishing her morning cleaning job near the school entrance. She was 32 years old, a black woman with gentle eyes, natural curly hair, and a calm presence that made people feel safe. She wore a simple work uniform, carried a small bag with her lunch, and moved through the wealthy world around her almost unnoticed. She was used to being invisible, used to people looking past her without wondering about her story. But Amelia always noticed others. She noticed the elderly security guard who needed help carrying his coffee. She noticed the nervous new employees who needed encouragement. And she noticed the lonely boy standing apart from everyone else. When Alexander slowly approached her, Amelia expected him to ask for directions or help finding a teacher. She never expected the words that came next. Can you be my mom just for school today? His voice was quiet, almost afraid that the question itself was too much to ask. Amelia froze. The noise of the school entrance seemed to disappear. She looked at the boy's face and saw something that money could never fix. He was not asking for a perfect parent. He was not asking for a new life. He only wanted someone to stand beside him for one important morning. Amelia knelt down slightly, so they were at the same level. She did not see a mafia heir. She did not see a wealthy child from a powerful family. She saw a child who felt alone. Across the city, Daniel Park, Alexander's father, was already beginning another demanding day surrounded by assistants, meetings, and endless responsibilities. He had built an empire by understanding power, but he had forgotten something far more important. His son did not need another person protecting his name. He needed someone protecting his heart. And on that ordinary morning, a woman who had never met the Park family was about to become the first person in years to truly see Alexander. She did not know that a simple act of kindness would reach the most guarded family in the city and change everything they believed about love, loyalty, and what it meant to be a family. Amelia Carter had spent most of her life understanding one simple truth. Kindness was often given quietly, without applause, without recognition, and sometimes without anyone ever knowing it happened. That was why she did not see Alexander Park as a powerful family's heir standing in front of her. She saw a young boy who was trying to be brave while carrying a loneliness far too heavy for someone his age. After a few moments of silence, Amelia gently adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked into his uncertain eyes. Only for today? She asked softly. Alexander nodded. It was a small movement, but Amelia noticed how much hope was hidden inside it. She did not promise him a perfect day. She did not pretend she could replace someone he had lost. She simply promised to stand beside him. For Alexander, that was already more than he expected. The school entrance was filled with families taking pictures, parents fixing their children's collars, and students laughing as they walked toward their classrooms. Alexander had watched those moments from a distance many times before. His world was filled with private drivers, security staff, and people who followed orders, but none of them could give him the one thing he secretly wanted: a normal morning. Amelia walked beside him through the crowd, not rushing him and not treating him differently. She asked about his favorite class. She listened when he talked about a science project he had worked on. She smiled when he quietly admitted that he was nervous about the family presentation at school. For the first time in a long time, Alexander did not feel like the name on his family documents. He felt like a child. Amelia knew nothing about the complicated world behind the Park family name. She did not know that Alexander lived in a mansion with more rooms than he could count, yet often ate breakfast alone. She did not know that his father, Daniel Park, spent years building a powerful organization while believing that providing security and comfort was the same as providing love. Amelia only knew what she saw in front of her. A boy who needed someone to listen. A boy who needed someone to say, "I am proud of you." As the morning continued, teachers and parents began noticing something unusual. Alexander, the quiet student who rarely joined conversations, was speaking with confidence. He answered questions. He smiled. He even laughed when Amelia made a small joke about how seriously he took his school schedule. Nobody understood what had changed, but Alexander did. For one morning, someone had chosen him before his family name. Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel Park received a message from one of his assistants. His son had arrived at school with someone unexpected. A stranger. A woman nobody recognized. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. His first reaction was concern. His second was curiosity. Because for years, countless people had tried to enter the Park family's world for money, influence, or status. But this woman was different. She had nothing to gain. And somehow, she had given his son something he had failed to give him himself. A reason to smile. Daniel did not know who Amelia Carter was yet. He did not know how deeply one ordinary act of compassion would affect his family. But that morning marked the beginning of a change that no amount of wealth, power, or influence could stop. Daniel Park had spent years building a world where everything had a place, everything had a purpose, and every person around him understood the importance of the Park family name. From the outside, his life looked untouchable. A private estate overlooking the city. A schedule filled with important meetings. Employees who followed every instruction without question. But inside the quiet walls of his home, there was one thing Daniel could never control. The distance between him and his son. Alexander Park was the only person in the world who could make Daniel feel powerless. Not because Alexander had any influence or authority, but because the boy carried a sadness that money could not erase. After receiving the message about the woman at school, Daniel sat alone in his office, staring at the photograph sent by his assistant. There was Amelia Carter, standing beside Alexander at the school entrance. She was not dressed like someone from his world. She did not wear expensive jewelry. She did not have a powerful family name behind her. She was simply a woman who had somehow made his son look different, happier. Daniel looked away from the screen, remembering the countless mornings when Alexander had left the house quietly, walking beside security guards instead of family. He had convinced himself that protection was love. He had convinced himself that providing everything was enough. But the image in front of him challenged everything he believed. Meanwhile, Amelia continued through the school day with Alexander, unaware that a powerful man was beginning to question everything because of her. She helped him prepare for his presentation, reminding him that confidence did not come from being perfect. It came from believing that his voice mattered. Alexander looked at her with curiosity. He was not used to adults speaking to him this way. Most people spoke about his future, his responsibilities, and the expectations attached to his family. Amelia spoke about his feelings. She asked what made him happy. She asked what he wanted to become. Simple questions that somehow felt impossible for him to answer before. During lunch, Alexander sat with other students instead of eating alone. Amelia watched from a short distance, smiling quietly as she saw him finally open up. She did not realize that this small moment was something the Park family had been missing for years. A genuine smile from the boy who had everything except a sense of belonging. By the afternoon, Daniel arrived at the school. His appearance immediately changed the atmosphere. Teachers recognized the Park name. Parents whispered among themselves. But Daniel did not pay attention to the attention around him. His eyes were only searching for one person, his son. When he found Alexander laughing with Amelia, Daniel stopped. The moment was simple. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Just a father watching his child experience happiness without him. For a brief second, Daniel saw the truth he had avoided. Alexander did not need another person managing his life. He needed someone who cared about the person behind the family name. Amelia noticed Daniel approaching and immediately understood who he was. The powerful man everyone knew. The father of the child she had helped that morning. She expected suspicion. She expected questions. Instead, Daniel remained silent, studying the woman who had done what countless professionals and family members could not. She had reached his son. And in that quiet moment, Daniel Park realized that the stranger standing in front of him might be the first person in years who truly understood Alexander's heart. Daniel Park had faced countless difficult decisions in his life, but standing in the middle of a school hallway, watching his son hold onto a stranger's hand, felt different from anything he had experienced before. The world knew Daniel as a man who always remained in control. He was respected, feared, and surrounded by people who carefully chose every word around him. But Alexander was different. His son was the one person who never cared about the Park name, the family influence, or the expectations placed on him. Alexander only wanted to feel understood. Amelia Carter looked at Daniel with calm eyes, not knowing what kind of man stood in front of her. She did not see power. She did not see reputation. She saw a father standing there because he had finally noticed something important about his own child. "You are Alexander's father," Amelia said quietly. Daniel nodded, his expression serious. For a moment, the hallway became silent. Teachers nearby watched carefully, expecting tension between the powerful businessman and the woman who had entered his son's world without permission. But Daniel did not ask why she was there. He did not accuse her. Instead, he looked at Alexander. "Are you happy today?" he asked. The question surprised everyone, especially Alexander. It was not about his schedule. It was not about his responsibilities. It was not about the Park family image.
It was simply about him.
Alexander looked at Amelia, then back at his father. "Yes," he answered softly. That one word stayed with Daniel longer than any business conversation ever had, because he realized he could not remember the last time his son answered that question honestly. Amelia gently explained what happened that morning. She told Daniel that Alexander had only wanted someone beside him for a school event. She made no excuses and asked for nothing in return. She did not try to impress him. She did not mention the Park family's wealth or status. She simply described a child who wanted to feel included. Daniel listened carefully. The more he heard, the more he understood that Amelia was not trying to become part of their world. She had only offered kindness when someone needed it. Later that evening, Daniel returned to the Park estate with Alexander. The house was as beautiful as always, with high ceilings, elegant furniture, and every comfort money could provide. But for the first time, Daniel noticed how empty it felt. Alexander placed his backpack down quietly and walked toward his room. Before leaving, he turned around. "Father, can Amelia come to the school event tomorrow too?" Daniel paused. Years ago, he might have immediately refused. He might have focused on rules, appearances, and security. But now he remembered the smile he saw at the school. A smile that had not existed for a long time. "We will talk about it," Daniel replied. It was not a promise, but it was the closest thing to an answer Alexander had received in years. That night, Daniel searched for information about Amelia Carter. He expected to find hidden motives. He expected a reason why someone would approach his family. But the more he learned, the quieter he became. Amelia had spent years helping others without seeking attention. She lived simply. She worked hard. She treated people with respect whether they had money or not. Daniel closed the file and looked out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he questioned whether he had been protecting his son from the wrong things. Maybe Alexander was never missing comfort. Maybe he was missing connection. And the person who reminded Daniel of that was someone the world had barely noticed. The next morning, Amelia Carter returned to Westbridge International School with no idea that her simple act of kindness had already changed the atmosphere inside the Park family. She arrived expecting an ordinary day, another morning of work, another moment where she would quietly move through the background while everyone else continued their lives. But this time was different. Alexander Park was waiting for her. The moment he saw her near the entrance, his serious expression softened. For the first time, Amelia saw him smile before anyone else spoke. It was not the careful smile he gave teachers or guests. It was a genuine smile from a child who finally felt that someone remembered him. Amelia greeted him warmly, and Alexander immediately began telling her about his presentation from the day before. He explained every detail with excitement, something he rarely did before. Daniel Park watched from a distance inside his car, observing a scene he never thought he would see. His son was talking freely. His son was laughing. His son was no longer hiding behind silence. Daniel had spent years surrounded by advisors, employees, and people who wanted something from him. But Amelia wanted nothing. That was what confused him the most. She had entered their lives with no expectations and no demands. She had simply cared. Later that afternoon, Daniel invited Amelia to the Park estate. The mansion stood above the city with its elegant design, enormous windows, and perfectly arranged gardens. It was the kind of place most people only saw in magazines. But Amelia noticed something different. Behind all the beauty, there was a quiet emptiness. The rooms were impressive, yet they felt cold. Alexander walked through those halls every day, surrounded by everything money could provide, but missing the warmth of a home. Daniel sat across from Amelia in his private office. He studied her carefully, trying to understand what made her different. "Why did you help him?" he asked. Amelia looked at him calmly. "Because he needed someone," she answered. It was a simple response, but it stayed in Daniel's mind. Most people approached him because of his influence. They wanted opportunities, connections, or approval. Amelia had seen his son standing alone and only saw a child who needed support. She did not see an heir. She did not see a powerful family. She saw Alexander. During their conversation, Daniel learned more about Amelia's life. She had faced difficult moments, worked long hours, and experienced times when she had to rely only on her own strength. Yet she never allowed hardship to remove her compassion. She believed everyone deserved respect, regardless of their position. Daniel listened quietly. For a man who had spent years measuring people by loyalty and usefulness, Amelia's way of seeing the world was unfamiliar. That evening, Alexander showed Amelia a small collection of drawings he kept in his room. They were pictures of places he wanted to visit and memories he wished he had. Amelia looked at each one carefully, giving every drawing the attention it deserved. Daniel stood outside the doorway and watched. He realized something painful but important. Amelia was not filling a space in Alexander's life because someone else failed. She was showing Daniel what that space had always needed. Not perfection. Not wealth, just presence. And for the first time, Daniel Park understood that the greatest thing he could give his son was not a bigger world, but a warmer one. For the first time in years, Daniel Park began noticing the small things he had ignored. The quiet footsteps in the hallway, the empty chair at the breakfast table, the way Alexander looked toward the door every afternoon, hoping someone would walk in and ask about his day. Daniel had spent so much time protecting the Park family name that he had forgotten the most important person carrying that name was still just a child. But not everyone in the Park family saw things the same way. When word spread that Amelia Carter had become close to Alexander, some members of the family questioned her presence. They were not used to someone outside their world having such a strong connection with the young heir. They believed status, education, and reputation were the only things that mattered. Amelia understood that she did not belong to their world. She had never expected an invitation into it. But when Alexander needed support, she stayed because she believed every child deserved to feel valued. One evening, during a family dinner at the Park estate, Amelia noticed Alexander becoming unusually quiet. The room was filled with important conversations about the family business and future expectations. Everyone spoke about what Alexander would become, but no one asked what he wanted. Amelia gently asked him about his favorite part of the school event. The simple question changed the entire atmosphere. Alexander looked up and started sharing his memories from that day. He talked about the presentation, the people he met, and the moment he finally felt like he belonged. Daniel listened carefully. He realized that Amelia had not changed Alexander by giving him anything expensive or extraordinary. She had changed him by making him feel heard. Later that night, Daniel found Amelia in the garden. The city lights reflected across the quiet landscape, and for a moment, The powerful man who controlled every part of his world seemed unsure of what to say. "You understand him better than I do," Daniel admitted. Amelia looked at him and replied gently, "I think you understand him too. You just forgot to listen." Those words stayed with Daniel. Nobody around him spoke that honestly. Most people respected his position, but Amelia respected his responsibility as a father. She did not judge him. She simply reminded him of something he already knew deep inside. Alexander needed his father, not just his protection. The next morning, Daniel made a choice. Instead of leaving early for meetings, he sat with Alexander for breakfast. It was a small change, almost invisible to anyone outside the family. But to Alexander, it meant everything. The boy looked surprised when his father asked about his plans for the day. He answered slowly at first, as if he was unsure whether the conversation would continue. But Daniel stayed. He listened. He smiled. And Amelia watched from a distance, knowing that the most important changes often began with the smallest moments. She had entered the Park family's world as a stranger, but she was slowly helping them discover something they had forgotten. A family was not built by wealth, influence, or a powerful name. It was built by the people who chose to be there when someone needed them most. The Park family had always been built on tradition. Every decision was carefully considered. Every person had a role. Every action was measured by how it affected the family name. But Amelia Carter had brought something into their world that could not be measured by status or reputation. She had brought honesty. And that was something some people were not prepared to accept. A few days after Amelia became a regular presence in Alexander's life, Daniel Park received an invitation to a private family gathering. It was a room filled with people who had known the Park family for decades. They respected Daniel, admired his success, and believed they understood what was best for the future of the family. But when Amelia entered the room with Alexander, the atmosphere changed. Some guests looked surprised. Others exchanged quiet opinions. They wondered why someone like her was being welcomed into such an important space. Amelia noticed the reactions, but she remained calm. She had never entered the Park family's world looking for approval. She was there because Alexander needed someone who cared. One family member politely questioned Daniel's decision. They suggested that Alexander should spend more time with people who matched his position and background. The words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. They believed Amelia was not important enough to influence the future heir of the Park family. Daniel remained silent at first. In the past, he might have agreed. He might have focused on appearances and expectations. But this time, he looked at Alexander. He saw his son sitting quietly, listening to adults discuss his life, as if he was not in the room. Before Daniel could respond, Alexander spoke. His voice was soft, but everyone heard him. "She is the only person who treated me like I was just Alexander." The room became completely silent. Those words carried more meaning than any argument could have. Alexander was not defending Amelia because she had power. He was defending her because she had given him something valuable. She had treated him like a child who mattered, not just an heir who had responsibilities. Amelia looked at Alexander with surprise. She had never expected him to speak for her. She had only wanted to help him find confidence. But in that moment, she realized something had changed. The boy who once stood alone outside the school gate was no longer afraid to express what he felt. Daniel watched his son carefully. He saw courage where there had once been hesitation. He saw confidence where there had once been silence. And he understood that Amelia had never taken his place as a father. She had reminded him how to become one. Later that evening, Daniel walked with Alexander through the quiet halls of the mansion. For years, those halls had represented everything the Park family had achieved. Wealth, influence, success. But now Daniel saw something different. Without love and connection, even the most beautiful home could feel empty. He stopped and looked at his son. "Thank you for telling the truth today," Daniel said. Alexander smiled slightly. It was a simple moment, but it meant more than either of them realized. Meanwhile, Amelia prepared to leave the estate, believing her part in their story was only temporary. She had helped a lonely child feel seen. She had helped a father remember what mattered. She never expected anything in return. But Daniel Park now understood that some people enter your life not because they want something from you, but because they have something important to
Teach you.
and that lesson was only beginning. Daniel Park had spent most of his life believing that responsibility meant carrying every burden alone. He believed a strong leader never showed uncertainty, never slowed down, and never allowed emotions to interfere with decisions. That mindset had helped him build a powerful life, but it had also created a distance between him and the person who mattered most, his son. After the family gathering, something inside Daniel began to change. He started noticing the moments he had missed. The quiet mornings when Alexander ate breakfast alone. The evenings when the boy returned home with stories that nobody had asked about. The small expressions on Alexander's face that disappeared whenever adults changed the conversation back to expectations and responsibilities. Amelia Carter had not entered their lives to replace anyone. She had simply reminded Daniel that being present was more important than being perfect. Over the following weeks, Daniel made changes that seemed small to everyone else but meant everything to Alexander. He adjusted his schedule so he could attend school events. He joined his son for breakfast instead of leaving before sunrise. He asked questions and waited for answers instead of assuming he already knew what Alexander needed. At first, Alexander was unsure. He had spent so long accepting distance from his father that he did not know how to respond to this new version of Daniel. But slowly, the walls between them began to disappear. Amelia watched quietly as the relationship between father and son started healing. She never took credit for the change. She believed people changed only when they were ready to see the truth themselves. One afternoon, Alexander came home from school carrying a small project. He rushed into the room where Daniel and Amelia were talking and proudly showed them his work. In the past, he might have hidden it away, afraid that nobody would care. But now he wanted to share it. Daniel looked at the project carefully and asked questions about every detail. Alexander's face brightened. It was not a grand moment. There were no cameras, no important guests, and no public recognition. It was simply a father showing interest in his son's world. For Amelia, that was the moment she knew the Park family was changing. But change was never easy. Daniel still carried years of habits built around control and distance. Sometimes he struggled to express emotions. Sometimes he returned to old ways of thinking. But each time, he remembered Alexander's words from that family gathering. He remembered that his son did not need a perfect father. He needed a present one. One evening, Daniel found Amelia preparing to leave the estate. She had always believed her role was temporary. She came into their lives during a difficult moment, offered kindness, and expected nothing in return. Daniel thanked her for everything she had done. Amelia smiled and told him that Alexander had always had a good heart. He only needed someone to remind him that it was safe to show it. Daniel looked toward the room where his son was laughing. For years, he had protected the Park family legacy. Now he understood that the greatest legacy he could leave was not a business empire or a powerful name. It was the memory of a father who finally learned how to love his child in the way he needed. And standing there, Daniel Park realized that Amelia Carter had not changed his family by giving them something new. She had helped them find something they had forgotten was already there. Months had passed since Amelia Carter first stepped into the Park family's world, but the greatest changes were not the ones people could see. There were no headlines, no public announcements, and no grand celebration. The transformation happened quietly, inside ordinary moments that once seemed impossible. The Park estate was still beautiful. The city still recognized Daniel Park's name. The family still carried its powerful reputation. But inside those walls, something was different. There was warmth. There was conversation. There was laughter. Alexander Park was no longer the silent child who stood alone at the school entrance, watching other families walk together. He was still thoughtful and reserved, but now there was confidence in his voice and happiness in his eyes. He no longer felt like he had to carry the weight of his family name every moment of his life. He could simply be Alexander. On the morning of the new school year, Daniel woke up earlier than usual. The old Daniel would have already been preparing for meetings and reviewing schedules before sunrise. But this time, he sat at the breakfast table with his son. He listened as Alexander talked about his new classes, his goals, and even small things that most people would consider unimportant. To Daniel, those small things had become the most valuable moments of all. Amelia watched them from across the room with a quiet smile. She remembered the lonely boy who had once asked a stranger for a few hours of kindness. Now she saw a child surrounded by people who truly cared about him. Later that day, Alexander walked through the school entrance again. The same place where he had once stood alone was now filled with a completely different feeling. Daniel walked beside him. Amelia was there too, not as someone pretending to belong, not as someone trying to change their family. She was there because she had become part of the story they shared. Several parents recognized the Park family, but this time, the attention did not matter. Alexander was not thinking about what others saw. He was thinking about the people walking beside him. Before entering the school, he looked at Amelia and smiled. "Thank you for that day," he said. Amelia gently told him that he was the one who showed everyone how important kindness could be. Alexander shook his head. He knew the truth. She had been the first person who saw him when everyone else only saw his family name. Daniel heard those words and looked at Amelia with gratitude. He finally understood something that had taken him years to learn. A person's value was never determined by wealth, position, or background. The people who changed our lives were often the ones who expected nothing from us. Amelia Carter entered the Park family as a stranger. She had no influence, no powerful connections, and no reason for anyone to remember her name. But through one simple act of compassion, she changed the heart of a lonely child and reminded a powerful father what truly mattered. And that day, the world remembered that dignity does not come from what a person owns. It comes from how they choose to treat others.